3 exercises centers around this iconic image of the Hollywood sign out in California. You've probably all seen this before. And we're going to remove all of the letters off the hill from H through D and replace it with our own custom phrase. So first things first, just a reminder, you can zoom in and out of an image easily with Photoshop with the Command key, or on the PC keyboard it's the Control key. The Command minus goes out, Command plus goes in. And if you're too far in or too far out and you want to go back to full screen, Command 0 will get you there. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So first things first, the stamp tool, which I actually already have activated, is if you hit S on the keyboard, as in stamp, it'll bring up the clone stamp tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the size a little bit of my stamp by right-clicking anywhere inside the image, anywhere inside the Hollywood image, and I have this control window. Now, if that didn't happen for you when you right-clicked, you could also do control-click, or I believe it's alt-click on the Windows keyboard to do the same thing. So I'm changing the size. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit to like 15 pixels. You can see it changes the size a little bit when I move. You can go really big too, but I'm going to go down to 15. And then also as far as hardness goes, so 100% hardness, if I did something right now, you would see it's kind of like a Sharpie marker, really hard edges to whatever I'm stamping or painting with. And 0% hardness is a really soft brush, so it'll be really kind of blurry around the edges. I'm going to make it like somewhere in the 20 range is probably pretty good. And then I'll hit return. Now I'm ready to do some clone stamping. So the clone stamp tool is a tool that is used very often by Photoshop professionals to remove blemishes or unwanted cellulite, believe it or not, from pictures of celebrities, from magazines, posters, stuff like that. So you're essentially painting with a part of an image instead of a color. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to hold down the Option key. You can see my cursor changes when I hold down the Option key, or Alt on Windows. It looks like a little target. So I'm going to click down in like an area of shrubs down here. Just click once and let go of both things, the mouse and the Option key. And then I'm going to go up to the D. You can see now my cursor has a little preview of whatever I'm going to paint with or stamp with, in this case, inside of it. So I'm just going to click and drag, and you can see down to the left as I do this, the cross is kind of moving around down there. And that's because it's showing me relative to where I clicked or defined my source point, which is the fancy name for it. It's showing me what I'm painting with. So I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, my stamp a little bigger. Just right click on it, keep it there. And again, I'm going to, now instead of using that same patch that I grabbed down here to paint over the D, I'm going to mix it up a little bit and grab another area, maybe of this shrub over here. So Option click. The reason I did that is because if you don't do that, the hill will quickly look very strange. It'll have like this repeating pattern of the same patch of hill, which would not make it look very organic or real. And since it's a hillside and there aren't really any repeating patterns, because it's a natural environment, you want to kind of make sure you mix it up. So every time you do a new letter, I would say a good rule is to just Option click on another area of the hill and then use that to paint over the letter. I removed all of the letters off the hillside, and you know, it's not perfect looking. It's a little blotchy over here where the sky is, and that's fine. As long as you all get the sense of how this tool works, how the clone stamp works, don't think it needs to be perfect right now. So all the letters are gone, and what we're going to do is we're going to type new letters, a new mashup of Hollywood and your name. So I'm going to make mine Buckwood. And first things first, you're going to hit the letter T on the keyboard, which accesses the type tool. You can also go over there and click on the icon to do the same thing. The font right now, I'm not sure what it is on your computer from the last Star Wars thing we did, but Myriad Pro may be what it is. Either way, we want to change that font because there's a better, more blocky typeface that's probably on all of your computers just as part of the system fonts. So first things first, we're going to click right on top of whatever that font name is. In my case, it's Myriad Pro. And I'm going to type the word Impact, I-M-P-A. Start typing it at least because that's the only font with that name, so it does an autofill thing, and we can just click on it to select it. So now we have the Impact font. Size we'll worry about in a minute. Color of the type. Now, usually the type in Photoshop fills with whatever your foreground color is, the block in front down here. So it'll be yellow if I start typing, and I can definitely change that later if I want, but I could also just make sure that it's white before I even start typing. So if you hit the letter D on the keyboard, that restores your color blocks to their default, which is black and white. And I want white to be in front because, like I just said, the type is going to fill with white, so I want the white block to be the top block. So I'm going to hit X. X switches those colors back and forth with each other. And by the way, these two little icons you see above the color blocks, the little tiny blocks and the little curvy arrow, those do the same thing. So this thing is for, if you hit X, that's doing the same thing, and this is restoring your thing to default with D. So those keystrokes are just handy for you to use to make things go a little more quickly. Okay, so what I'm going to do, when we did Star Wars, we drew a box, and our type filled that box. And that was good because we wanted to keep our type contained within it, so then we could do that cool trapezoidy thing we did to make the type look like it was going away from us. But if it's just one word you're typing, you really don't have to do the whole draw a box thing first. You can just click, right? Now that phrase, just to remind you what that is, lorem ipsum, that's just a filler type phrase. So it's the beginnings of this Latin phrase that's kind of a traditional graphic design thing where if you don't have font, if you don't have the copy written for a magazine article or a poster or whatever, this is just filler type until you get the real text. So don't worry about it. It actually goes away. I'm going to hit the caps lock key on my keyboard, and I'm going to type my own little mashup Buckwood. Now it's super small, which we definitely want it to be bigger. So right now you can see it's 12 point. So I'm going to just double click on that type. You can also, if your cursor is blinking anywhere inside your type, you can hit Command A, and that will select your type too. And then up top where it says 12 points in the font size window, we're just going to click once on it so it lights up blue like we did with the font a minute ago. And I'm just going to use my up arrow on my keyboard. I can actually hold it down if I want. And I'm going to get it up to, I think like 58, even like 60 is pretty good. So we're going to keep it there. Now, I know that I want to distort my type, just kind of like we did with the Star Wars type. And if you remember, Photoshop doesn't let you distort a type layer. So distort means I'm just going to be able to grab it around as much as I want and distort the image. And it won't let you do that to a type layer until you do that rasterize thing. So the other day I showed you, or in the video, the earlier video, I showed you how to rasterize using the layer menu. So you go to Layer, Rasterize, Type. So that's definitely one way to do it, but you can also do it much more quickly. If you're right on top of a type layer, which down here, that's what that is, a type layer, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say Rasterize Type. Now you'll see what changed is that capital T went away, and there's little tiny, it might be hard to see on my video, but there's little tiny blotches of white that represent the type on that layer. So that's what my layer looks like now. Okay, so no longer a type layer that I can go back and edit, but it's ready to be distorted. Okay, so I'm going to hit Command T, which brings up my transform box. And just for what it's worth, I really rarely ever touch these side handles. I usually just use these corner handles, especially when I'm making something bigger or smaller. But for distort, you might use them a little bit. So let's right click. And by the way, these are all your transformation options. The one we want is distort. Okay. Cool thing about this is before we even start dragging these handles around, I can move it by clicking in the middle of it, just so it's like right over the hill, or half on, half off. And now I can kind of grab these handles. I can even like scooch it in a little bit. So that's where I would use a side handle. But I don't really typically use that when I'm making it bigger or smaller with the whole scale function. Okay. So I'm going to get it to where I like it. It's getting kind of blurry and pixelated, and part of that's normal just because that's how it renders while you're transforming something. And when you hit return, it cleans it up pretty well. It's also not like the highest resolution image we're working with, so don't worry too much if it's looking kind of blurry. Now, if I hated what I'd done, I could hit escape to get out of it and start over with the whole Command T thing. But if I like how it's coming, I'm going to hit return. And you'll see when you hit return or enter, all those transform handles went away. And now my type is kind of looking better than it did a minute ago as far as the pixelation. Okay, and then you can use your move tool. The top tool is your move tool on the toolbar. You can get to that by hitting V on the keyboard, as in Victor. Kind of a weird keystroke for the move tool, but that's what it is, V. And then you can kind of scoot it around. You can use your arrows on your keyboard if you want. Okay, so essentially my letters are where I want them to be. And now I'm going to add a shadow. So if you move your mouse down on top of the little tiny thumbnail picture, is what that's called, of my white type, right on top of it, my little Mickey Mouse glove is hanging out there, and I'm going to hold down the Command key, or Control in PC land, and you'll see a little box up here in front of it, in front of the glove. So if you're right on top of that thumbnail, you're going to see a glove with a little box kind of over top. And I'm going to click once. When I clicked, it selected all of the letters. So those little dancing lines mean that I've selected those things. So whatever I do next is going to affect whatever's inside the selection. So there's a way to get rid of those dancing lines when we're done, but just know that's what those lines, those moving lines mean. You've just selected something. Okay. So, very bottom of your Photoshop interface, there are a bunch of icons. In the version you're using of Photoshop, you'll probably see a little trash can, and then you'll see a box with a plus sign, right, and a little square with a plus sign on it. Okay, very bottom right of Photoshop below your layers. Okay, so we're going to click once on that box, the plus sign. And what that does is it makes a brand new layer in Photoshop. So new layers are created either by doing what we just did, which is just an empty layer, or pasting stuff from the web that creates a new layer, or using the type tool is another way to create new layers. So layers start to accumulate quickly as you work in a Photoshop file. That's totally normal, but just know right now this is an empty layer with nothing on it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fill this with black. So we're going to go to Edit, Fill. So right down in the Edit menu, Fill, F-I-L-L. And yours likely says Content Aware under Contents. It probably says, it's asking you what you want to fill it with, this selection. So I'm going to say black. Now keep in mind that if one of your colors down at the bottom of your toolbar is black, you can also do the whole foreground color, background color, and it will fill with whatever that color is at the time. So right now I technically could do background color, but black is also an option. So I'm going to say black. Everything else is good. Okay. All right. So now my letters are black. And it might look like that you just threw a bucket of paint over your white letters and destroyed them, but you didn't. They're still there. They're on a layer right below. So that's the reason why we made a new layer first, instead of just selecting the white letters and coloring them black. Make sense? So we have two layers with your letters. One's black, one is white. So now to get rid of these dancing lines, the selection lines, I'm going to deselect them. So Command D. Command D. Okay, so they go away. And a shadow is typically behind an object, so we're going to go down to where your layers are in that little Mickey Mouse glove. If you hover over any layer and click and drag, you'll see it turns into a little grabber. And you can kind of reposition layers wherever you want them to be. In this case, I want the black letters to be behind the white, because that's typically what a shadow would do. Okay, right now the shadow's not really doing its job because you can even see it. So I'm going to distort the shadow. So you probably remember this by now, but Command T brings up the transform box, right click, distort, and I'm going to use these handles to kind of scoot my shadow underneath my letters. Okay, so I don't want to do anything like crazy like that or that. I want it just to be as if it was on that hill, right? It's pretty subtle, but you want it to be within the hill area and sort of off to the bottom right diagonally. Okay, some of my shadows kind of creep into the sky, which would just be weird. Okay, cool. Now, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for now. We're going to hit return. So remember, return renders your transformation. You can change the opacity of any layer at any time, and what that means is you can make a layer more transparent. So I'm on the shadow layer, the black layer, which, by the way, I can be fancy and double-click on and call it shadow if I want to. Oops, maybe spell it right, Mr. Buck. Gosh, okay, shadow. Cool, and then you can change the opacity. You can bring the slider down to like 70, 80, whatever. I think 75 is pretty good. You can see what that's doing. It's making it look kind of ghosted on the hill there, which is a handy little thing to know. Any of these layers could be, the opacity could be changed for. Okay. And the last thing we're going to do before we flatten this and save it is to take some chunks out of the letters just to make them look like some of the shrubs are in front of it. So if you hit E on your keyboard, E brings up the eraser tool. okay? And the eraser tool acts a lot like a brush or a stamp. You can change the hardness of it, the size of it, and if you're wondering for why this is a cross right now, it's because your caps lock button is likely still pressed. So if you take caps lock off, it'll look a lot like the stamp. And you can change by right-clicking on it the size of the eraser or the hardness. Okay, I'm going to keep my hardness pretty high because it's going to look better, I think, if I do that. And I'm going to kind of take some chunks. Whoops. By the way, Command Z, which you all know is a really handy thing because it undoes stuff. Undo is Command Z, but you can also do Command Option, those two buttons held down at the same time, and hit Z, and you can go back 20 steps. So it's kind of cool, little option to know about because you might work in Photoshop and decide, you know what, I hate what I did 10 steps ago. Well, now you have the ability to go back 20 steps, so it's pretty cool, handy thing. But you can see what I'm doing. I'm just taking some little bites out of the letters just to make it look like these shrubs are in front. Really tiny detail, but kind of makes it sort of cool looking. And then we're just going to flatten this and save it. So when you're done, I don't really need to see your 3 separate layers. So you can, I would say merge visible or flatten image is a good thing to do. So merge visible, we'll merge everything with an eyeball next to it, which is good. And then I'm going to go to File, Save As. What I would suggest is saving it to your desktop, which is the best place to save it before you upload it to Google Classroom. Cool, and just make sure, by the way, that your name, I'm going to call mine Buck Wood, and I know that your name will be somewhere in that the file name too, so I can know who did it. So just make sure you don't just leave it called Hollywood Sign before you save it. Cool. All right, and that's the end of this video. Thanks.